this is Terry A. Wilson, and I'm here with another pop-up interview. If you've seen one of my pop-up interviews before and you've come back to watch another one, thank you very much. I appreciate it. If this is your first time watching an interview, thank you very much. I appreciate it. There are a lot of things that you can be doing with your time, and I appreciate you spending some time with me and my guest. Now, what is a pop-up interview? A pop-up interview is basically an interview that just pops up. I record these interviews when it's convenient for me and my guest. If you are a book blogger, a reader, an author, a service provider, or just somebody who wants to come on and talk about books or whatever, book lover, let me know. The easiest thing to do is to go to my website, terriawilson.com, and click the link that says pop-up interview. Now, I do need to let you know I am taking the months of June and July off as a hiatus from season 2. Excuse me. I still have the same seasonal allergy issue that I had when we started this season. It is not going away. June and July is going to be pretty busy for me. I have several different conferences coming up, and I've got a couple big projects that the due dates are very, very close, and I'm a little stressed and nervous about it. So I will be starting to record again in August. I am, however, filling up for August. So if you're interested, go to that website, fill out the form, and get on the schedule now. I'm really excited to have today's guest. She is my twin, in case you haven't noticed. I'll just leave that out there. You can figure it out from there. This is Kerry Blaisdell. Kerry, how are you today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and put my cough drop in to prepare for this. Kerry, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you write?
I write in a lot of different genres, but currently I'm published in urban fantasy / paranormal romance, however you want to. Those are very interrelated, but those are my main ones right now. My first book, Debriefing the Dead, came out last spring, and my second one just came out this week. So,
well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Happy book birthday. So the first question I'm going to ask you is, because I spend a lot of time interviewing romance authors, it's just kind of the way it's turned out this season. And people who are in the romance genre sometimes don't understand the difference between urban fantasy, science fiction, fantasy in general, high fantasy, and paranormal fantasy.
Okay. Boy, let me try and unpack some of that. So paranormal romance, and to be honest, I'm not much of a paranormal romance author, really. My books just kind of get shelved with paranormal romance because people aren't necessarily certain where to put them.
Okay.
So my own interpretation of paranormal romance might not be everybody else's, but paranormal romance, the focus of the book is still the romance, but there is usually some sort of world existing that's got paranormal elements. And most of the time, those books, that's like the whole world. Like it's werewolves, it's shifters, it's pick your paranormal element. Urban fantasy falls more on the side of, or less on the side of the romance maybe, and more on the side of the real world. Most urban fantasy takes place in our world, the world that we all as humans see around us, with something going on that most of the world doesn't know about. So for instance, in my books, my heroine's going along thinking that life is just normal, like she's a human being and stuff's going on the earth and it's all great. And then something happens to her and she discovers that there are these supernatural things that are going on that she and the rest of the world didn't know anything about. Science fiction, I do read science fiction, and I also do read fantasy. And I know now that there's some subgenres of romance associated with those. So there's, strict science fiction, and then there's science fiction romance, and then there's strict fantasy and fantasy romance. And I would say fantasy is definitely on the side of, hey, we are in a completely different world where there's elves and fairies and wizards and magic and, often high quests and things. Where science fiction is, we are maybe not always out in space, but it's that kind of, it's high technology. Instead of quote magic, it's aliens who have powers or things that happen, and we either do it on another planet or it affects our planet. And so urban fantasy is kind of, it's actually very difficult to describe to people who aren't familiar with it, because it's not fantasy. I don't have elves. I'm not in a magic world. It's not science fiction. It's not quite the same as paranormal shifter romances and things like that. But it's got the closest I can come is it's sort of like the TV show Supernatural, if you watch that, where a lot of people on the show have no clue that something's going on until a demon shows up and,
knocks at the door.
Yeah.
Saying, hey, Girl Scout cookies.
Yeah, right.
Or I guess if it was a demon, it might be something like, hey, soul cookies.
Right. Yes, exactly. I'm pretty sure they did an episode of something like that.
Okay, so and that you did a great job explaining that, but that's a question I often get. I write in paranormal romance, and one of the books I'm working on right now is going to be more of an urban fantasy, in that, at least in volume 1, the romance isn't the key to the story.
Yes. Yeah.
It's there.
Yeah.
But it's not the key. It's not the whole purpose of the story.
Right. Right. And that's actually something that is a little bit of a tweak for me too, is that urban fantasy, often the romance is there, but it takes place over several books. Mm-hmm. So my impression of most paranormal romance is it's a closed book. At the end, there is some sort of happily for now or happily ever after. There might be a series involved, but the series would then move on to the next pair of characters who meet and fall in love. Whereas with an urban fantasy, there may be love triangles, or there may be conflict that doesn't quite get resolved at the end of the first book and then carries over into future books.
Right. Yeah. I think that's excellent. So the book you're writing now that came out this week, tell us again the title of the book.
So the first one is Debriefing the Dead. The second one is Waking the Dead, and they are direct sequel, like it's a direct series. So
what are they about?
I'm sorry, what?
What are they about?
So the premise of the first one is my heroine is a retired grave robber. She's now actually a fence, and she has this weird career where she
sorry, I'm not laughing at that, but it's like she's a retired grave robber. I have not heard that yet of anything.
Okay. So that's what she is. So she has, now what she does is she fences stuff back and forth between the Marseille elite in France, who are basically stealing from each other because they're jealous of each other's art collections. And she owns an antiquities shop, and these two guys come in and they want something from her that she's claiming she doesn't have, but actually she does have it. Because her dead partner left it to her 6 months ago. And what happens is she ends up getting murdered by demons, and she and her sister both, and her sister passes on to the afterlife. And Hyacinth, my heroine, when she's conversing with Archangel Michael and he finds out why she was killed, he realizes she's got some abilities that he needs to help stop an ages-long battle between him and Satan. And so she makes a deal with him and says, hey, if you want me to work for you, you got to send me back to Earth so I can find a good, safe home for my nephew, who has now been orphaned. He's 7 years old. So the first book is about her sort of first mission for Archangel Michael, going off trying to get this relic back that he needs to help keep Satan in prison. And then the second book kind of picks up with, now this is sort of her new life, where she's working with Michael, she's tracking down some relics, she's got some very interesting complications going on in her love life.
Wow, that's fascinating. Where did that story come from?
That's the question I hate the most, because honestly, I don't know. I'm one of those people, I've been writing forever, honestly, and I'm not making that up. Some of my earliest memories are my dad would write stuff down for me because I was too little to write it myself. I've been seriously pursuing publication for 15 to 20 years. Prior to that, I had a couple finished things, but nothing I didn't really know what I was doing. And then I sort of discovered that what I write is romance, and a lot of it is romance. So I wrote a couple of romantic suspense. I actually wrote a time travel romance that will never see the light of day anywhere. And then I wrote 2 romantic suspense novels thinking, okay, I'm going to do that. I love it. It's complex. It's interesting. It's fun. And kept getting those sort of you know, we don't really quite know where this fits. We don't know, whatever, rejections. And I was getting a little discouraged, and I just decided to write the book that I wanted to write. And the thing is I was sitting there thinking about how, I know publishing has changed a lot since then, but how agents really were sort of the gatekeepers to publishing. And if an agent wasn't interested in your book, you couldn't really get any farther because it was never going to get to an editor's desk without an agent attached to it. So the whole idea was, I thought, what if there was somebody who was the gatekeeper to the angel of death? And that's kind of how my heroine sort of popped into my head as, okay, so she's going to end up working for Archangel Michael, who, you know, his job is to shepherd souls from the earth, either up to heaven and St. Peter or down to hell and Satan. And if she's his assistant, then she's kind of the assistant to the angel of death. And as for the actual like plot, I just started writing, and this all came out, and then I revised a couple thousand times and got a couple hundred rejections, and here we are. So easy peasy, right?
That's awesome. I think that's part of what I like to write in the fantasy, especially urban fantasy, and even paranormal romance. I like the paranormal romance in that because I'm still a romantic at heart. I still want a happy ending, you know, all the gushy stuff.
Yeah.
I just like it when, you know, they shift into a werewolf and beat the guy to death or something, you know.
Right.
But what I like about it and is because like I have a contemporary romance that I wrote, and they're all human, and it got really boring.
Yeah.
And then it was like I would write myself into a corner, and I couldn't come up with a magic spell, or a demon that just popped in and carried them off. And I was like, wow, this is kind of dull. And it was treachery. It was like trudging through, like you're trying to cram for the SATs or something like that.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of how I ended up with romantic mystery suspense, was because it's not that I'm easily bored. Like I can always find something to do. I'm always multitasking. So I was sort of like, after the time travel, I was like, okay, I'm going to try. I discovered I thought I wanted to write historical. That's how I ended up with the time travel. I thought I wanted to write historical, but I thought it would be good to do it sort of like Outlander, where it was a time travel with a modern heroine going back so that I could, you know, avoid the pitfalls of not doing the correct language or whatever, you know. It's like, oh, well, she's from the 20th century, so that's why she said that or whatever. But I discovered as I was writing it that I loved the contemporary parts of the story. So I was trying to write a regular straight up contemporary, and same thing. It was just sort of like, I'm not, my brain isn't engaged enough. I need to do something with this. So the mysteries I liked because it added that layer of complexity. I couldn't do the magic, I couldn't do supernatural stuff, but it was like, aha, this complicates it enough, and that's keeping me interested. So, and I still love those books, and I think I'm going to self-publish them this summer, but I don't have time right now. So,
well, awesome. That would be great. You'll have to let us know when that happens. Or let me know. I always talk about us like I'm just a team of one. I don't know. It makes me sound more important when I say, well, my team and we did. And
I use MailChimp for my mailing list, and they always put like, you know, our address at the bottom of my thing. And I'm like, I'm one person sending out whatever, it's us, sure.
Yeah. The other thing I was going to say that I like about urban fantasy and paranormal romance is I think it was a great way for women characters to come out and be really bold, kick-ass, strong heroines. And, you know, like my first exposure to this type of writing was L.K. Hamilton.
Yeah.
And so the Mary Gentry series, and then the other one that she did.
Yeah, I'm drawing a blank too.
Oh my gosh, the one where she's the necromancer, and because Kate Daniels was another series that I found. I found Kim Harrison, and I found all of those types of stories late, like it probably maybe only 4 or 5 years ago. is when I discovered all of those types of stories, and I ate them up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I like that. I mean, I think there are a lot of, I think contemporary romance authors are doing a great job making strong female characters. So please,
Yeah.
if you are out there, I am not saying anything about that, okay?
Right.
No
Right.
angry emails. So, but I just like the idea. Those were the first books that I read where the female characters was sometimes actually the ones who would come in and save the day.
Right. Right.
And I hadn't seen that before.
Yeah. And there's a definite sense too of, it is hard to explain without sounding like because I love contemporary romance. I read a lot of contemporary romance and find very, like you said, very strong heroines and things. But there's something about in the urban fantasy, maybe it's because of the fantasy aspect of it that, they get to be not just strong, but like really strong and really creative, because the types of problems and the conflict that they're facing is literally sort of out of this world and big, it's sort of that go big or go home kind
Absolutely.
of.
Yeah, that's probably a good way of saying it.
Yeah. And like I said, there's nothing like I love, oh boy, now so I'm drawing a blank on names. Julianne Long, her contemporary romances, I love, and her heroines are like unusual and fun and kick-ass in their own ways and stuff like that. But you don't get the chance to kind of sort of really showcase, I feel like. Whereas with urban fantasy, there's just like so much getting thrown at, not just the women, but all the characters, that it really gives you a lot of chance to kind of explore the conflict and dig deeper and things like that. So.
Well, and I think the same thing is happening in science fiction too. When you think about like, I haven't read a lot of science fiction, but I do enjoy the Star Trek books, the Star Wars books. I do enjoy that world. And there's even been a change, I think, more lately in those books to have stronger women characters. I mean, if you think about like Lord of the Rings, the female elf, of course, names are totally skipping out on us today. Maybe I should start preparing for these interviews, but
Galadriel, or
it's the one that Liv Tyler played.
Yeah, I grew up on these books, and I'm going to kick myself because I'm drawing a blank on her name also. But yes, I know who you mean. Yes.
But I mean, I think you can see that there's a difference in that type of a character that Tolkien did. And then fast forward to some of our modern characters, the women have evolved. They have changed.
Right. Yeah. Well, science fiction in particular has been a male dominated, not that there have not been good female authors with good female characters, because there have. And if you have not read Connie Willis, I would highly recommend.
Okay. I'm going to write that name down.
I think she's still considered science fiction. The book that I would start with is Doomsday. It's called Doomsday Book. And it's not the Doomsday Book, it's Doomsday Book. But so there have been, but it's been like, 99%, Orson Scott Card and all the guys, and very few of the women until recently. And I think it's some of that crossover into romance where now, like I said, you said, we both said, we're getting the science fiction romance category, or the romance with science fiction elements. And there's a very fun and exciting time, because there's so much crossover now. Even just 5 or 10 years ago, it was like, oh, you can't have romance in a fantasy.
No, well, think about, you mentioned Outlander, and you're talking about time travel romance. One of my favorite books of all time is The Time Traveler's Wife.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that book just moves me so much. That's a great example of crossover genres.
Right.
Which is happening all the time. You have the genre now of people who are writing books about zombies who are having romances, and they're zombies.
Right.
And at first that's like, oh my God, really? But then you think, no, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Because there are people out there that are asking for that stuff.
Right. And it really was, I mean, it was always odd to me. And that was some of the rejections that I got were, we don't know where to shelve this. Like, you know, this is a good book, you have good writing, but we don't know where it would be put in a bookstore.
Couldn't they just shelve it under B?
Right. Well, and I think that's what's happening now, especially with, you know, the online universe where we don't have the concept of shelves the way, you know, we used to. And I do understand that if somebody picks it up, you know, 10 years ago, they pick it up and they're expecting a romance novel, they're probably going to be disappointed. And if they pick it up and they're expecting a fantasy novel, they're probably going to be disappointed. They might end up liking it, but it's not going to be what they expected. Now there's so much more blending that, you know, I think readers are smart, and I think they can figure it out. And I certainly have heard from a bazillion people at this point who are like, you know, oh yeah, well, we don't really care what category you call it, we like this or whatever. But it is, you know, but that's new. That's very new. So, and I'm excited that it's happening and to be part of it. So,
well, I think it's just, and I mean, I think I've talked about this with every person who's come on. I think people are clamoring for good stories.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what it boils down to. You could have, you know, a political intrigue, romance that takes place on an alien planet.
Right.
And you could have a political intrigue romance that takes place here in, you know, just everyday people.
Right.
And I think it's just people want good stories.
I agree. Yeah, definitely.
And that's why I think it's a fun time to write. I think we as writers have more control over what we do.
Yes, definitely.
And we have the ability, you know, you mentioned self-publishing, with self-publishing and with smaller publishing houses out there. We have that chance more than we ever have.
Right.
To connect to readers, to bring the readers what they're asking for.
Right.
And it's, you know, I've only been publishing since August. So, I mean, I sound like I've been publishing forever, and that's not true. I can't really address what it was like 10 years ago.
Uh-huh.
But I think a real good example of this is, again, I forgot the name, but the guy who wrote the fiction book recently that had artificial intelligence in it, and he came out and he said it's not a science fiction book. And the Twitter universe went crazy because they said, dude, yes, it is. Just accept it.
Uh-huh.
And it's like, it's that interaction that is out there that's just, it's exciting.
Yes. Yeah.
I like it. I like it a lot.
Yeah. Well, and like I said, I mean, so my first book that came out has been out basically a year at this point. And that book, I am not exaggerating, it got over 100 rejections from various agents. I sent it to a couple of editors, trying which way I could. And the whole reason it finally got published, well, I might have eventually gotten around to self-publishing that one. I was really, really wanted a actual publisher for my first book because I knew the learning curve was going to be so steep. Mm-hmm. And I have a full-time job and kids and stuff like that. And I was like, I would love to, you know, have a publishing house take care of the details. Mm-hmm. So anyway, the reason it got published is my aunt, who I adore, and I owe her like bazillions of gratitude or something. She insisted I send it to her as a PDF to read. And at the time, I think she was at least 70-ish at the time. And in my head, I thought, my 70-year-old aunt is going to be reading my book, and oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And what if she hates it? And about 36 hours later, she emailed me to say that she had started reading it and couldn't put it down and finished it all in one setting and loved it. And I thought, if my aunt, and I believed her, like there was no sense anywhere of like, oh, I'm just saying this because this is my niece. Like, she's not that kind of person. She's very much, that's, you know, what she says, what she means. So I believed her, and I thought, okay, if she likes this, and other people I've shown it to have liked it, and agents have told me we like this, but we don't know what we can do with it, maybe I can try one more time. And I ended up sending it to 2 small presses, and Wild Rose Press is the one who said, hey, we like this too. And it's kind of, you know, gone off from there. and I'm trying not to toot my own horn too much here, but part of what I wanted to do was speak to what you said about people wanting good stories, because I thought it was a good story, and my critique partners thought it was a good story, and my aunt thought it was a good story, but I still had like no idea what to expect when it was actually published. And being a small press, I have to do a lot of my own promo, which I know even actually big houses, you have to do your own promo too. So that's not even a thing really. So just, 10 months later after it came out at the end of March, I had submitted it to several published writing contests, including the Ritas, and with almost no expectation. And for anybody watching who doesn't know what the Ritas are, that's Romance Writers of America's big published author contest. It's basically like the Oscars of published romance novels. Long story short, this book is a finalist in the Ritas, and I just feel like, okay, there were people, like there are readers out there who wanted to read this, and I'm so grateful to Wild Rose Press for taking a chance on it, and I'm so grateful to my aunt for pestering me until I sent it to her. And I feel like, okay, this, I just feel very, 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 very grateful that I didn't just totally give up because I thought it was something that maybe nobody would ever want to read.
Is this the romantic suspense, or is this the
urban fantasy?
The urban fantasy.
Yeah, it's in the paranormal romance category in the Ritas, and so that's why it is a paranormal romance, but it's more on the urban fantasy side, and the category has both in it. So I feel like I always need to be a little bit careful and clear, because it's not what a lot of people expect when they pick up a paranormal romance, but there is definitely romance in it, and there is romance that continues through the series and is going to eventually at some point have a resolution to it and everything. But so it's the urban fan. It's Debriefing the Dead. That's
congratulations.
Thank you.
You should toot your horn. You should get one of those skywriters.
Well, I thought about wearing my Rita sticker on my forehead.
Yes.
During the interview, but I held back.
No, come on here. They were all about bragging. I love it. I love it. It makes my job easy. So, what would you say? Let me see how I want to word this. What would you say to the person who has a story in their head right now, but they don't know what to do with it?
So if they are like, this is their first attempt at writing, is that kind of where we're going? Okay. I would say just sit down and write the story that you want to write and get it finished. And then, or different people work different ways. So start writing it and find people to get feedback from, whether that feedback is during the process. Because I know some people like a deadline and they like to do a chapter a week or something to keep themselves motivated and going. And other people, would rather just write all the way through. But at some point, get a tribe, find your peeps, find people that will be honest with you in a constructive way, not in a mean way, and listen to them, and make changes and edit. And that's not to say to change your story. So I had critique partners when I was writing Debriefing the Dead the first time, and we had a good relationship where mainly the things that I got were things like, I'm confused by this part, or I'm not sure this is believable, not you should change this to whatever it is. So that kind of criticism where it's like, okay, this, I know it's clear in your head, but it's not really making sense here. And then just from a basic sort of craft standpoint, read in your genre, read some more in your genre, good craft books to I'm sort of hesitating here because I love craft books and I read a lot and I gleaned a lot, but you also have to kind of, at some point when you're done, when you've got that all inside you, then just stop reading them and continue with the writing.
Yes, no, I know what you're saying, because I find that sometimes, especially when I'm stuck, I'll read a little bit of the craft books, but then I get to a point where if I read too much, I have too much doubt in my ability.
I feel like writing, it's like a performance, like a dance performance or an acting performance. I did a lot of theater when I was in high school and college. And it's that point where you know your lines, you know your blocking, where you're supposed to go on the stage, you know what you're supposed to do, and then you just have to sort of forget all of those things and just get yourself in character and go and do what you need to do. And I think writing is like that too. But for a new writer who has never done it before, I think reading the craft books is invaluable, and doing the exercises and practicing. And then sit down at your piano and create your book, or then get on the stage and be part of the dance with everybody else who's moving around you, you know?
Right. Now, this is a caveat to all my people out there. This is me talking. This is not Kerry talking. If you do look at the craft books, do not buy the craft books from the authors who only have 1 or 2 books published.
Yes.
Okay? Don't. Go out and look at what they've published, not in the craft business, the craft genre, but in like the fiction genre. Find out what they've published. Go check that out. Then come back and look at the book. So that's just that is an added benefit, watchers.
Yes.
Added benefit.
And I would say too, try and find, as part of your tribe, try and find some writers that are farther along on the journey who can recommend some good books to you.
Right.
And I don't know if it's okay to put in a little plug for, it's not my book, but one of the ones I love the most is Goal, Motivation, and Conflict by Deborah Dixon. That is a tried and true and wonderful book that makes a lot of sense. I'll just say that.
Yeah,
for fiction especially.
That's perfect. I haven't heard of that one. I like James Scott Bell. Why is it that these names are It's you, Kerry. You have zapped my brain. I can't think of any of these names.
Thing, I have stolen your brain. Speaking of science fiction. So I can't remember author names off the top of my head right now, but one of them, another good one is Save the Cat. That's a good one.
I like Save the Cat, but I find that Save the Cat sometimes I feel a little too confined.
Well, I think, and that's part of, that's part of what I was saying about, like, you know, then forget it all, like read it and absorb it and try it and practice it and then forget about it and go do what you need to do. Right. Like it's all there, all the skills and techniques, understand the rules so that you can break them consciously, intentionally, you know. People always say, well, what's the rule of blah, blah, blah? And I'm like, I don't care what the rule is. I'm just writing my story, but you have to do it in an intentional way that works. You can't just randomly say, I'm going to throw grammar out. You know, you can't just.
Right. Jamie Gold is another one that I just remembered. And C.S. It's either Lankin or C.S. Larkin.
Larkin sounds familiar. I can't remember. I'm not sure why, but that sounds familiar.
Yeah, so I like those books a lot. The Save the Cat was really good. Romancing the Beats.
Yeah, that's a good one too.
I have that one. I have a whole shelf over here. If you can see all these books, I just don't want to like leave the interview and say, oh wait, hey, I'll be right back. Hold on.
And sometimes it's a concept too, that because there's also Scene and Sequel. I'm not sure if that's a book or if that's a concept, but it's a good. A lot of these you can Google, like, you know, writing craft, and you'll get you'll get good advice online. But you also have to be, again, just like with critique partners, you have to be careful, because you'll get one person who says do A and another person who says do Z, and you're kind of left going, well, which is it? So you have to. It has to be your story still.
And I think that's an important thing. Then you really have stressed that, is it has to be your story.
Yes. Yeah.
You know,
definitely.
If you want to write a story about a unicorn shifter and a satyr shifter meeting and riding off into the sunset, make it happen. That's
right. That's right. And I was actually just watching, before this interview, I was watching a YouTube video on, I don't know what the official topic is. It was from Craft Commerce, and it's about marketing and how people try to market to the middle. They're like, I want the biggest audience I can find. I'm going to make this appealing to everybody. And his argument was actually the opposite. He said, find the niche. Find the smallest audience you possibly can, and then fill their need. Because if you try and fill the need of the average, it's impossible, because it's this big amorphous thing, and there's no, there's no way to stand out. So that's the same thing with writing. you have to write well and you have to tell your story well. But if you do that, tell your story, whatever story you want to tell. There's somebody out there who'll want to read it. That's my motto.
Absolutely. I agree with that. And there may not be a ton of people that want to read it,
right,
but there will be somebody out there. That was one thing I was really surprised when I put my first story out there. I had no idea what to expect as far as the reviews went. And I was prepared. I was prepared for the negative reviews. I was not prepared for the positive ones.
I know. Isn't that weird? Yeah. I felt the same way. I was like,
you know, and when they understand it, like when somebody comes and they get it and you're like,
yeah. Well, and I think partly for me too, it's that introvert thing. I think introverts have more of a sort of a sense of, I don't know. It's not that I don't think I'm good, because, you know, not to be arrogant, but I think I'm a good writer and stuff like that. I don't have a lot of problems with low self-esteem, but there's a little bit that feeling of putting myself out there and then wanting to shy away, even when it's a good response. It's a little overwhelming, I guess, sometimes. Yeah. And I like to say I'm a social introvert because I'm not shy. I'm not even remotely shy, but sometimes when all that attention is focused on me, I just sort of feel like, okay, can we get back to real life now? You know, it's just a little bit much. And I felt that way with this book. I've gotten this one that just came out. The first one did so well that I felt a lot of pressure with the second one. It's sort of like, you know, if you go out on a basketball court and shoot, you know, 10 3-point shots in a row in your first game, and then everybody's expecting you to do that the second time. And, you know, what happens if you mess up? So I was very, very nervous when this book came out, and I'm getting early good reviews. And of course I'm happy and honored and feel wonderful about it, but I'm also a little bit still like, okay, that's okay. You guys can all stop talking about me now. Not that I really want them to, but
the gal who wrote Eat, Pray, Love.
Yeah.
She talks about that, and at a TED Talk, as well as in a book that she released, because her second book bombed.
Oh, wow. And I don't think I knew that.
It bombed based on what the publishing house and what she thought, whether or not, you know,
right.
I mean, I probably would have been stoked by her numbers. Who knows, you know?
Right.
I only sold 5,000 copies. Yeah, I only sold 5,000 copies this time, but, you know, I'd be like, oh, okay. But she talks about that, about how there's a lot of, you know, anxiety to repeat what you have done. And that's why sometimes it's hard when you have a series.
Right.
And
yeah, you set some expectations.
Yeah.
And I was a little worried because in the second book, it's not that I changed things, but it's sort of the way I envisioned the series when I wrote the first book. When I wrote the second book, it came out differently than I was expecting. And I'm basically Jennifer Cruzy, Jenny Cruzy calls them the girls downstairs. I write from the girls downstairs, and weird stuff comes out that sometimes I look back and I'm like, I do not remember writing that. Like, I don't know where that came from. And this book was a little bit like that the second one, it came out as this very, my motto basically by the end was go big or go home. And I kind of went so big that now I'm trying to write the third one while I'm also, you know, still publicizing and launching the second one and everything. And it's been a real interesting experience because I made it so big at the end of the second one that I'm like almost a little bit terrified to write the third one, because I'm like, what if I set expectations for plot and all this stuff so far out there, and then whatever I come up with in my head, everybody's like, okay, what happened? You know? Yeah. And I really have to stop doing that and follow my own advice and write the story that I want to write. But it's a weird situation, because I actually wrote the sequel before the first one sold. Actually I hadn't quite finished it. I was like 80% done with the sequel when I sold the first one. So there was still time when I was going through edits on the first one. I could be like, oh, I need to go back into the first one and emphasize this because it's going to be important in the second one. Or I could do something in the second one and tweak it and change it based on the edits that we did in the first one, which actually weren't that many. So that was good. But this third one, now I've got 2 books set in stone. They're already out there. You know, if I said that somebody did something in book 2, I can't go, oh, let's go change that because that doesn't really work with what I want to do now. So series are good and I love them. I love reading them, and so far I'm enjoying writing them. But it does definitely start to feel a little bit like I don't just have like 6 balls in the air. I've got like 6 times 6 balls in the air, and I have to make sure that I'm not, you know, saying something completely different from whatever I started. So I don't keep a series Bible like some authors do, but I have a series Excel spreadsheet where I've just got like rows and columns of details and pages of, okay, who knew what when? What color is their eyes? Do they have a middle name? Do I know their birthday? You know, it's just like all this weird random stuff. So
I've been reading about wiki pages.
Oh,
and
yeah.
a lot of authors are setting up wiki pages.
That's a good idea.
It's not a like just setting up a Word document or a Scrivener document. So I have to teach myself how to do that. Yeah. So that's been put down on the list. But you're absolutely right. You have to start. I had to create a chart, or I guess a table, you could say, of names.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because even just something as simple as that, I had different stories, different series going on, and I would like, oh wait, if I use this name again,
right?
Are they going to think it's a crossover? No, I don't want it to be a crossover. Okay, so now I have to keep track of this name.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And now that I'm in my 3rd book, the other thing is that it's like I was like, oh, I've got 12 people whose names start with J. You know, like you get like, okay, you know, some of these minor characters, maybe I should change those to other names, because I don't subscribe too much to you can't have anybody who has the same first initial. I know there's some authors who are just, you know, really strict about that. I'm not that bad, but I also don't want a lot of confusion. So it's like, okay, what can we do to fix that? This doesn't work for my overall series, but one thing I discovered is Google Keep is actually a nice way to, I don't know if you use Google products, but Google Keep works kind of like a bunch of sticky notes that you can then
okay,
categorize and cross-categorize. So like I can have sticky note and it can be categorized as debriefing the dead and something to do with ghosts. And then I can have another sticky note that's something to do with ghosts, but it's categorized as waking the dead. So I can find that under my ghosts category, or I can find it under my waking the dead category, or whatever. I would love it if I could just do the entire thing that way, but I'm finding it gets a little bit cumbersome, and you're limited to 50 labels. And yes, I am that complicated. I would need more than 50 labels to keep track of everything. But it's great for making lists and reminders to myself about, oh yes, you know, I need to resolve this thing that got started in book 2 and was continued got started in book 1 and was continued in book 2. And I think it's about time for that piece of it to be figured out and finished, you know. So it's good for stuff like that.
You use Scrivener?
I've heard of it, and I don't know. I can't remember. I think I investigated it a few years ago, and I don't know. It looked like there was a learning curve, and I was sort of.
There is a learning curve, but my guess is you'll learn it very fast. I learned it really fast, and I still don't know everything about it, but that might help too. You might.
Okay. I'll look into that. Yeah.
Awesome.
Because now that I'm getting farther into the series, I think I need something more than just the spreadsheet. So back in my previous life, before I became a teacher, this is my second career as a teacher, been writing the whole time. But before that, I was in corporate communications and actually did like database programming. So there was a program called FileMaker Pro that I loved. And I think it's still
I remember FileMaker.
Yeah.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah, and I used to have access to it at various jobs, and they would let me take a copy home so that I could work from home, and then I could also use it for my home use. And I think it's still out there, but it's like outrageously, it's like $1,000 or something to buy. And so there's no way I could ever actually purchase it. But that's the kind of thing where I'd be like, oh, I would love to do that, because I could do records and I could cross-reference and I could do searches and reports and, you know, all these things, all these totally nerdy, geeky data things. But
yeah, look into Scrivener, or my
awesome.
husband uses OneNote.
Oh yeah, I've
he
tried
really likes that.
and also Evernote, and found I don't know. I felt like, I can't describe exactly what, because I tried OneNote pretty extensively. I've also written a historical mystery, the Star Historical Mystery series that I've sort of backburnered for a while. But that one, I was using OneNote to kind of keep track of like all the murder mystery details and the historical details and stuff. And I think the problem, it might have been with me, but the problem felt sort of like there were so many different ways I could have tabs and notebooks and binder. I mean, it was just sort of like, I got lost in I couldn't see the forest for the trees, pardon the cliche, but that's what it felt like. It was like there was so many different ways. And that's kind of what I like about Google Keep, is it's a lot simpler, but it's also a little too simple. So what I really need, maybe Scrivener is the answer. So I'll look into it, but I need something kind of between Google Keep and OneNote in terms of flexibility or something.
Well, I gotta say, I am looking forward to reading this series. It sounds awesome.
Yay.
And we are at the end of our time, if you can believe it or not.
I just looked at my clock. I see. Yeah, that went fast.
Yeah, it does go fast. So thank you very much for coming in and talking with me. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you very much for coming and watching this show. The best way to find out about pop-up interviews is to hit the bell down below, excuse me, and subscribe to this channel, as well as get notifications when you hit the bell, so that every time I post a video, you will have an email in your box that you can go and, oh, Terri's got a new video, let's go watch it. Also, go to my website, terriawilson.com, and click on Pop-Up Interviews. I will make sure and post all of Kerry's information down below in the description, so that you can go out and buy all her stuff. You can go out and see all this craziness that she created, and just like a big old stew, she's just throwing it in and it comes out and it's all wonderful. So thank you very much, Kerry.
Thank you so much.
And you all have a great night.